This is a pressure gauge. It sits in a maritime museum in Aberdeen, Scotland. The face is simple. White enamel with black numbers, a red needle that once swung between atmospheres. If you could touch it, the glass would feel cold, smooth, indifferent. This particular gauge came from the Byford Dolphin, a semi-submersible oil rig that operated in the North Sea. It measured pressure. It kept men alive. On November 5th, 1983, a gauge exactly like this one was the difference between breathing and ceasing to exist. Between remaining intact and becoming something the human body was never designed to become. 4 men trusted this system. They were saturation divers. Elite professionals who lived under pressure for weeks at a time, descending hundreds of feet below the ocean surface to work on oil infrastructure. They earned extraordinary wages because they accepted extraordinary risk. The pressure at those depths would compress an ordinary person instantly. But these men had adapted. Their blood was saturated with inert gases. Their bodies had become something other than normal, engineered for the deep. The question this gauge asks is simple. When you've surrendered your biology to technology, what happens when the technology fails? 4 men ceased to exist in less than 1 second. The manner of their passing violated every principle of human anatomy. This is the story of the Byford Dolphin accident, and the moment physics moved faster than flesh. November 5th, 1983. The North Sea. The Byford Dolphin drilling rig floats in water over 300 feet deep, anchored against swells that could capsize smaller vessels. Beneath the platform, in the cold dark, saturation divers work in shifts. They are repairing wellheads, inspecting pipelines, performing surgery on infrastructure that keeps oil flowing to Europe. But here's what makes saturation diving different from ordinary diving. You don't come up between shifts. Normal divers descend, work briefly, then decompress slowly on the way to the surface. Saturation divers skip this process. They live in a pressurized chamber on the rig for weeks at a time, sleeping, eating, existing at 9 atmospheres of pressure. When it's time to work, they transfer through a sealed system into a diving bell, descend to the seafloor, complete their task, then return to the chamber. No decompression between dives, only at the end of their rotation. After weeks, do they slowly, carefully return to normal atmospheric pressure over several days? It's efficient, it's profitable, and it requires absolute precision. The system has 3 components: the living chamber where divers sleep, the diving bell that transports them to depth, and the trunk that connects them. The connection between bell and chamber is the critical moment. A seal must form perfectly before the clamp opens. If the seal fails, if pressure equalizes too quickly, the results are catastrophic. On this particular day, 4 divers are in the living chamber: Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, Björn Bergerson, and Truls Hellevik. They've just completed a dive. The bell has returned and docked with the chamber. The routine is simple: confirm the seal, open the clamp, transfer personnel. It takes approximately 4 seconds for this procedure when done correctly. On November 5th, it took less than 1. Someone, either a dive tender named William Crammond or the system itself, depending on whose investigation you believe, opened the clamp before the seal was secure. 9 atmospheres of pressure met 1 atmosphere in a fraction of a second. The air inside the chamber didn't leak. It erupted outward with unimaginable force. Here's what you need to understand about pressure and the human body. We are fragile. We are vessels of liquid held together by tissue and bone. At sea level, one atmosphere of pressure pushes on us from all directions equally. We don't notice it because our internal pressure matches external pressure at 9 atmospheres, the pressure these men lived under. Everything changes. The gases in your blood, your tissues, your lungs exist in a delicate equilibrium. Your body has adapted over days to tolerate this. But adaptation only works if pressure changes slowly. When the clamp opened prematurely, the pressure differential was instant and absolute. 9 atmospheres to 1 in a fraction of a second. The human body cannot survive this. The air in Truls Hellevik's lungs expanded faster than any biological response could manage. His cardiovascular system experienced immediate failure. His blood, supersaturated with nitrogen, underwent rapid phase transition. Not metaphorically, literally. The dissolved gases came out of solution instantly. But Truls Hellevik wasn't just in the chamber. He was positioned near the opening when the clamp released. The decompression created a pressure differential of such magnitude that it drew him toward the 60-centimeter gap, all of him, through an opening 2 feet wide. The autopsy report uses clinical language. It documents findings that had never been seen in human physiology before. The report describes complete structural failure, separation of skeletal components, distribution of biological matter across distances that seem impossible. The medical examiner noted that the event occurred too rapidly for the nervous system to register. There was no awareness, no moment of realization. Existence simply stopped. Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, and Björn Bergerson experienced immediate fatalities as well, though they were positioned deeper in the chamber. The pressure wave terminated their lives where they sat. No time to comprehend. No time to respond. One moment they existed. The next, they were absent. Outside the chamber, 2 dive tenders were present. William Crammond perished instantly from the blast effects. Another tender survived but sustained severe injuries. 4 men. 1 second. Because a seal wasn't confirmed. The investigation began immediately. The Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, insurance investigators, engineering experts, all descended on the Byford Dolphin to determine what failed. The official conclusion identified human error. The tender, William Crammond, was designated as responsible for the premature opening. His own passing in the accident made him a convenient focal point for blame. The narrative became straightforward. A distracted worker made a fatal error. But other evidence suggested systemic flaws. The interlock mechanism, designed to prevent the clamp from opening unless the seal was verified, had either malfunctioned or been circumvented. Maintenance logs showed recurring issues with pressure sensors. The company had prioritized operational efficiency over safety protocols. The families fought for decades. They demanded accountability. They wanted recognition that this wasn't simply bad luck. It was preventable. The oil companies settled quietly. Regulations were updated. Interlocks were redesigned. But no one faced prosecution. No executive experienced consequences. The deep-sea oil infrastructure that generated billions in profits simply continued. The deceased were returned to families. Truls Hellevik was 34 years old. Edwin Coward was 35. Roy Lucas was 38. Björn Bergerson was 29. They left behind wives, children, parents who would spend years trying to understand how their sons and husbands could vanish so completely. The Byford Dolphin rig continued operating. It worked in the North Sea for another 36 years before being scrapped in 2019. Workers who served on it after the accident reported unease around the dive system. Some refused to enter the chamber where the incident occurred. Others reported hearing sounds, metallic creaks, pressure changes that had no apparent source. Rational explanations exist for all of it. The rig was old. Metal expands and contracts. The mind fills silence with meaning. But the chamber remained operational for decades. Repaired, repainted, returned to service within months of the incident. Men lived in it, slept in it, breathed recycled air at 9 atmospheres, trusting the same type of system that had failed catastrophically. The pressure gauge in Aberdeen sits behind glass, labeled and contextualized. Museum visitors walk past it without pausing. It looks mundane, just an instrument. But every gauge like it, still in use on rigs across the North Sea, carries the same implicit agreement. Trust the system or don't dive. Saturation diving hasn't stopped. It's safer now. Interlocks are redundant. Protocols are stricter. Automation reduces human variables. But the fundamental physics remain unchanged. You are still vulnerable flesh existing at pressures that would compress you instantly. You are still trusting that the people who built the system, who maintain it, who operate it, care enough to get it right. The Byford Dolphin accident revealed something uncomfortable. In industrial systems where profit is measured in millions per day, safety represents cost to be minimized. The lives of 4 men, no matter how skilled, how experienced, how trusted, become data points. The investigation was thorough, but the conclusions were predictable. Assign blame to those who cannot object. Update the procedures. Resume operations. There's a photograph of Truls Hellevik that occasionally surfaces. He's young, composed, standing on a dock somewhere in Norway. He looks capable, confident. He had no idea that his final moment would become a case study in decompression physics, an example cited in engineering courses, a warning about what happens when 9 atmospheres meet one. His family requested certain documentation remain sealed. The request was honored. What exists in the official record are descriptions, clinical terminology, measurements. The neutral vocabulary of science applied to what used to be a human being. The pressure gauge in the museum doesn't move anymore. The needle is fixed at 0. But if you look closely at the faceplate, you can see faint discoloration. Oxidation from years of exposure to salt air, moisture, the corrosive atmosphere of the North Sea. Every gauge like it, still in operation, still reading pressure in diving bells and saturation chambers, carries the same silent message. The margin of error is absolute 0. 1 failure. 1 unsecured seal. 1 moment of system compromise. And there is no second chance. The question the gauge asks. The question that Truls Hellevik, Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, and Björn Bergerson couldn't answer because time didn't permit, is this: when you place your existence in a system built by the lowest bidder, maintained by rotating crews, operated under the pressure of deadlines and profit margins, are you trusting engineering or are you trusting probability? 4 men trusted the system. The system failed. In less than 1 second, they were gone. The gauge remains. Silent. Measuring nothing. A relic of the moment when physics proved faster than biology, and 4 men learned that the deep doesn't forgive. The Byford Dolphin was finally scrapped in 2019, 36 years after the accident. But the lesson it taught, about trust, about systems, about the fragility of human flesh against the indifference of pressure, remains permanent, written in gauges, in regulations, in the memories of families who never got to say goodbye.